The hospital lights buzzed overhead, cold and sterile, while pain twisted through my body like barbed wire. I had lost the baby. The doctor's voice was clinical, detached, like it was routine. But this wasn't routine for me. It was the death of a dream I never got to hold. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. I called Liam, my husband, the man who promised he'd never let me go through anything alone. He answered on the second ring, annoyed. "I'm busy, Nora. Can't this wait?" I whispered, "I lost the baby." Silence. "Then, we'll talk later." And he hung up. I stared at the screen, waiting for a follow-up call that never came. That night, alone in a cold hospital bed, with no flowers, no hand to hold, I closed my eyes and felt my heart give up, not from the miscarriage, but from the silence of the man I loved. They said it was a cardiac episode. I had flatlined for nearly 2 minutes before they brought me back. But what no one knew was that I hadn't wanted to come back. When I closed my eyes in that hospital bed, all I felt was betrayal. Liam, who once kissed my forehead and called me his everything, had left me alone in my most broken moment. No apology, no explanation, just absence. And now I was back, breathing, blinking, but hollow. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it a curse. I had died in more ways than one that night. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a woman desperate to be loved. I saw a woman who had been shattered, then returned to choose differently. They gave me another chance at life. And this time, I wouldn't waste it begging a man to love me. The morning after I was discharged, Liam finally showed up. He brought flowers, acting as if nothing had happened. "Crazy few days," he muttered, like I'd just had a cold. I watched him, his practiced smile, the way he touched my hand like it was a formality. The words I wanted to scream died in my throat. Something inside me had changed. I realized then I didn't want an apology. I wanted the truth, and I would get it, not through anger, but with silence and watchfulness. I pretended to accept his explanation, nodding while he blamed traffic deadlines, his phone battery. I knew better now. I knew what real love didn't look like. That night, I lay beside him in bed, listening to his even breathing, and I made a vow he would never again see me as weak. And one day, I would leave him the same way he left me, without warning. A week later, the dreams began, except they weren't dreams. They were memories of moments that hadn't happened. Yet, conversations, betrayals, tears I hadn't cried. The first time I saw Liam in one of them, whispering to a woman I'd never met, calling her baby, I woke up gasping. And yet, I knew it was real. Something had cracked open inside me when I died, like I was being shown what I hadn't been ready to see. Slowly, I started piecing things together. The late nights, the forgotten anniversaries, the way he always turned his phone face down. Liam wasn't busy. He was with someone else. The nausea wasn't from shock anymore. It was rage. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I smiled more, cooked his favorite meals. I let him believe I was healed, still fragile, still his. All the while, I was gathering the truth. I wasn't going to break again. I was going to build. I started with the small things, checking his browser history, following the numbers on the phone bill. Within a few days, I had a name, Vanessa, and within a week, I had photos. I wasn't surprised. She looked exactly like the kind of woman Liam used to scoff at, perfectly curated, all designer, and no depth. They weren't discreet either. He was so comfortable in his lies that he didn't even hide the hotel charges anymore. I saved everything, printed screenshots, timestamped emails. I created a private folder labeled Exit Plan. Every night, I added something new. My pain was becoming paperwork, and in a way, that gave me power. But I wasn't just going to leave him. Not yet. First, I needed to become someone who didn't need him at all. Someone who could walk away with more than just survival. I was going to walk away with everything he thought I could never live without. While Liam texted her from our living room, I started investing in myself. Therapy sessions became my refuge. I went back to the gym, enrolled in an online certification, and started freelancing again. My confidence, once buried under years of dismissiveness and gaslighting, began to grow like wildfire. I reconnected with old friends, one of whom introduced me to Marcus, a quiet, kind lawyer with eyes that didn't wander and words that didn't bruise. We started with coffee, nothing more. But even in those small meetings, I felt something shift. I wasn't looking for a replacement. I was remembering what respect felt like. Liam never noticed, or maybe he didn't care. Either way, his negligence gave me space to evolve. Every time he smirked at his phone, thinking I was too naive to know, I smiled back. He thought I was still broken. He had no idea I was already walking away. Eventually, the cracks in Liam's perfect little world began to show. His company faced an internal audit, one I knew about weeks before he did, thanks to a well-placed conversation I'd had with an old college contact. He came home one night, disheveled, panicked. "Everything's falling apart," he muttered. I listened. I nodded. I offered him tea. But inside, I felt nothing. No urge to comfort. No instinct to save. He was standing in the fire he built with lies and arrogance, and I wasn't going to pull him out. Not this time. I watched as he paced the kitchen. Frantic, he asked if I could help. Make calls, pull favors. I told him I was tired. Maybe tomorrow. His face twisted in disbelief. That's when I saw it. The first flicker of fear in his eyes. The realization that I might not be the woman who'd always wait in the wings anymore. The more he unraveled, the calmer I became. Liam started noticing my distance. The warmth in my voice had cooled, the softness in my eyes replaced by steel. "Are you mad at me?" he asked one evening, touching my arm. I smiled. "No, just tired." He bought flowers the next day. Cheap ones, wilted, too little too late. I thanked him, put them in the trash after he left. Vanessa must have dumped him too, because suddenly he was home more. Trying, but trying for the wrong reasons. Not because he loved me, because he was losing control. He asked if we could start fresh. I agreed. And then, slowly, I began transferring the accounts into my name, selling shared assets, preparing the divorce papers. When I finally told him I wanted to separate, his face paled. "Why now?" he stammered. I looked him dead in the eye. "Because you left me long before I left you." Liam tried to guilt me, said I was abandoning him when he needed me most. I wanted to laugh. "You mean like how you abandoned me in the hospital?" I asked, voice steady. His mouth opened, closed, but no words came. He hadn't expected me to remember. He thought I'd forgive and forget, like always. But I remembered everything. The silence, the cold, the drip that beeped while I cried alone. He begged, cried, promised to change. But my heart was no longer his to beg from. I told him he'd get everything. He gave me nothing. No love, no loyalty, no support. I handed him the divorce papers. He asked who I'd been talking to, if someone was in my ear. I almost told him about Marcus, But no, he didn't deserve to know who helped me remember my worth. Let him sit in the silence. Let him taste what he once served me. The day I walked out, the sky was gold with sunrise. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. My suitcase was light, my heart even lighter. I passed the coffee shop where Marcus had first handed me a book instead of a pickup line. I smiled. I was no longer running away. I was walking toward myself. A few weeks later, I heard Liam had been fired. Vanessa, predictably, ghosted him. He showed up at my new apartment once, unshaven and desperate. "I have nothing," he said. "Now you know how it feels?" I replied, closing the door gently. There was no slam, no dramatic scream, just peace. The same peace I had begged for in that hospital room. Now it was mine, fully. If you've ever been left in your worst moment, don't beg them to stay. Rise, rebuild, and let them learn what it feels like to be alone with regret. It didn't take long for people to notice the shift in me. The quiet wife who once lived in Liam's shadow had become someone entirely new. I dressed differently, confidently. I spoke clearly, not meekly. At a dinner with mutual friends, I arrived late, smiled politely, and sat beside Marcus. Liam's face went pale. He didn't recognize this version of me, and that terrified him. He tried to make subtle jabs at the table about how I used to hate wine or how I was finally social again. But I just laughed. Turns out I just needed better company. I said, raising my glass. The table chuckled. Liam did not. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And I had become someone he couldn't manipulate, someone who no longer needed him. That dinner marked a turning point. He finally realized he had lost me, and this time I wasn't coming back. Soon after, Liam made one final attempt to reel me back in. He wrote me a long email, pages of poetic apologies, sprinkled with nostalgic references, and gaslighting dressed as remorse. He even mentioned baby names we had once picked out, like twisting a knife. "I didn't know how much I needed you until you were gone," he wrote. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, a clean paper trail. His manipulation didn't sting anymore. It repulsed me. I'd spent years believing his version of love was the best I could get, conditional, selfish, performative. Now I knew better. I didn't need to fight him. I only needed to stay free. I archived the message, then blocked his number again. He had made me feel disposable. And now he was discovering what it meant to be irrelevant. The power he once held was gone. I didn't even flinch reading his words anymore. With the divorce finalized and my new life blooming, I poured everything into building something just for me. I launched a wellness blog, sharing parts of my journey. Not the ugly betrayal, but the healing that followed. Surprisingly, people resonated with it. They emailed me, thanking me for voicing what they had felt in silence. Some were still in marriages like mine. Some had escaped. All of them carried the same hunger for peace. My platform grew, and soon I was hosting small workshops, public talks, even podcast interviews. One afternoon, someone asked me, "What would you say to the woman you were back then?" I paused. I tell her she's not crazy. She's just not seen. And one day, she will be. But she has to choose herself first. That moment stayed with me. I had lived unseen for so long. Now, I was no longer hiding behind anyone's shadow. Marcus had become more than just a quiet presence in my life. He never asked for more than I could give. He never rushed me. He was just there, steady, warm, and fiercely respectful. It wasn't the kind of love that screamed or demanded. It whispered. It listened. One day, while we were walking in the park, he gently reached for my hand. I let him. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious about being touched. I didn't flinch or brace myself for disappointment. I felt safe. He didn't ask about Liam, didn't pry into my past. He simply said, "You don't owe anyone your pain." That sentence unlocked something in me. I wasn't defined by what I survived. I was defined by how I rose from it. And with Marcus, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. Slowly, softly, honestly. The kind of love I didn't believe existed was real. Months passed. The seasons changed. And so did I. There was a peace in solitude I had never tasted before. Some nights, I still woke up remembering the hospital bed, the quiet drip of the four, the cold absence of the man I once begged to love me. But those memories no longer broke me. They reminded me of the woman I used to be, the one who died alone in that sterile room, believing she was unworthy. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who had rebuilt her soul from the ashes of abandonment. I no longer looked for closure from Liam. I didn't need revenge or a dramatic ending. I had given myself everything he never could: dignity, hope, and self-respect. I stopped asking why he did what he did. The better question was, why had I stayed so long? I knew the answer now, and I had forgiven that version of myself. The day Liam finally broke came with a storm, both literal and emotional. I received a call from a mutual acquaintance, warning me that Liam's company had collapsed due to a scandal involving embezzlement and negligence. I didn't flinch. I only asked if anyone had been hurt. They hadn't. That evening, I opened social media and saw his name trending for all the wrong reasons. His smug smile was now a symbol of disgrace. His so-called loyal mistress had vanished, taking what was left of his dignity. That night, I sat by my window, watching the rain pour down. I thought about the night I had once wept alone in a hospital bed while he was too busy to care. And now, he was the one drowning, alone, desperate, with no one answering his calls. It was never revenge I wanted, just truth. And now he was finally forced to live it. 2 days later, Liam showed up outside the wellness center where I was giving a talk. He looked nothing like the man I had once married. His tailored suits were replaced with wrinkled shirts and tired eyes. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, waiting like a child outside a locked door. When I finally walked outside, his voice cracked. "Can we talk?" I looked him over and replied, "About what?" He searched my face for softness, for some sign of the woman who used to melt at his apologies. She was gone. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "I see that now." I smiled, the kind that hides 1,000 past heartbreaks. "You didn't make a mistake, Liam. You made a choice. And now, so have I." I walked away, leaving him in the cold drizzle, watching my back like it was a memory slipping out of reach. As I turned the corner, Marcus was waiting beside his car. He offered me his umbrella without a word, and I took it with a quiet laugh. "Was that him?" he asked. I nodded. He finally realized I was never coming back. Marcus didn't gloat. He just opened the passenger door and waited. That was what made the difference between them. Liam had always needed an audience for his love, a performance. Marcus gave me silence, safety, and space. As we drove home, I glanced at the storm in the rearview mirror, slowly fading into the distance. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding or trying to prove I had healed. I simply had. And I didn't need Liam's acknowledgement to make it real. I had rebuilt myself brick by brick, stronger, wiser, and freer than ever. That kind of peace can't be taken. It can only be earned. Liam tried again over the following weeks. He sent flowers, letters, even a copy of the photo we'd once taken on our anniversary, scribbled with the words, "Let's go back." But time doesn't work like that. You don't get to hit rewind after years of neglect. You don't get to pick up where you left off if you left someone shattered. I donated the flowers. I never read the letters. And the photo? I burned it, not out of spite, but as a ritual, a funeral for the woman who once clung to those memories. That part of my life was over. My story had changed. And if Liam wanted to relive his glory days, he'd have to do it without me. I no longer fed his ego. I no longer danced for scraps. I had outgrown the version of myself who thought being chosen by a broken man was something to celebrate. One afternoon, my podcast team received a guest pitch. Liam. He wanted to share his side of the story, his redemption arc. I laughed. He was still chasing sympathy, still addicted to attention. I replied politely, "This platform isn't about justifying the harm people cause. It's about healing from it." He never responded, but I knew he read it. And that silence, that was my closure. He had lived for the applause, for the image. Now all he had was the truth, and it was a cold, unforgiving companion. I didn't need to humiliate him. Life had done that for me. I simply kept building my new world while his crumbled in the rear view. When people asked how I could be so calm, I told them the truth. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's what you build after the fire dies down. And I was standing in a palace made from ashes. I thought I'd feel more when I saw him again, months later, at a mutual friend's charity gala. He stood near the back wall, shoulders hunched, barely noticed by the crowd he used to dominate. I was in red that night, glowing, centered, loved. Marcus stood at my side, his hand resting gently at the small of my back. Liam's eyes met mine across the room. There was no apology in them this time, just regret, and maybe for the first time, understanding. He nodded, slow and defeated. I nodded back, not in forgiveness, but in farewell. Some ghosts don't need exorcising. They just need to be witnessed one last time before you let them drift away. I turned back to Marcus, who leaned in with a quiet, "You okay?" I smiled. "I am." And I meant it. I was no longer surviving. I was living. Fully. Finally. And I wasn't alone. The final time Liam tried to contact me, he didn't call or text. He wrote a short public apology on his profile. No names, no dramatics, just a man admitting he had failed someone who once trusted him, and that he didn't expect to be forgiven. The comment section was divided. Some applauded his growth. Others weren't so kind. I read it once. That was enough. Growth isn't about what people say when they've lost everything. It's about what they did when they had everything. Liam hadn't changed. He had simply been exposed. And sometimes exposure is the harshest form of rebirth. My own rebirth had taken pain, discipline, and a deep, silent strength. I didn't need public applause to prove I'd changed. I just lived differently, loved differently. My life wasn't a revenge story. It was a resurrection. I had died, once, quietly, under the weight of his neglect. Now I breathed freely. When I tell people my story now, I don't dwell on the heartbreak. I talk about the turning point, the moment I realized I could stop waiting to be rescued and start rescuing myself. Pain gave me clarity. Betrayal gave me freedom. And solitude gave me the space to become someone new. I stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" That shift changed everything. I built a life that didn't need an apology from my past to flourish. I laughed without guilt, loved without fear, and chased dreams that once felt too distant. And every time someone asks, "How did you survive that?" I smile and say, "I didn't just survive. I was reborn." My story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every woman who's ever cried in silence, been left behind, or told she wasn't enough. You are. And sometimes leaving the past behind is the greatest justice of all. Marcus and I never rushed anything. We moved slowly with intent and care. There were no fireworks, no grand declarations, just warmth that stayed, steady and real. One evening, while walking near the lake, he stopped and said, "You don't need anyone to complete you. You're whole on your own. But if you'll let me, I'd like to walk beside you anyway." That moment undid me more than any apology Liam ever offered. It wasn't about being saved. It was about being seen. Truly, deeply seen. I nodded, unable to speak, tears filling my eyes, not from pain, but from healing. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares. Marcus didn't erase my past. He simply didn't run from it. And with that, the final piece of the old me gently let go. Not because I'd forgotten the pain, but because I'd finally chosen something better than it. When I visited my hometown a year later, the streets looked the same, but I wasn't the same woman walking them. I passed the old cafe where Liam and I used to meet and paused only to smile at the memory, not the man. It was strange how time could bleach emotion from even the most intense heartaches. I no longer hated him. I didn't even pity him. I just no longer needed anything from him. That was freedom. True, profound freedom. I walked farther to the hospital where I had once been left alone. This time, I didn't tremble walking through its doors. I asked the nurse at the desk for permission to leave a donation in the name of every woman who had ever cried silently in those halls. She smiled, surprised, and thanked me. I left my name and signed. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about remembering. My mother once told me that sometimes the people who hurt us the most were the ones we fought hardest to keep. I hadn't understood that then. Now I did. It wasn't weakness that kept me clinging to Liam. It was hope, the desperate, aching kind. But hope, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. It chains you to pain. I had broken those chains, and in doing so, I had reclaimed every version of myself that Liam had tried to dim. The girl who dreamed loudly, the woman who believed fiercely, the soul who loved too much. None of that had been wrong. It had just been misplaced. With Marcus, those parts of me weren't too much. They were enough, more than enough. And that was the real rebirth. Not becoming someone new, but returning to who I was before the world taught me to settle for less. It's strange how people treat strength like coldness, like choosing not to return to someone who abandoned you is cruel, as if forgiveness must always include reconciliation. It doesn't. I forgave Liam long ago, but I would never let him back into my life. Boundaries aren't bitterness, they're self-respect. And mine had been hard-won. Every woman I met who heard my story would pull me aside, eyes wide with tears or awe, and say, "How did you do it?" I always replied, "I stopped asking him to change, and I started changing myself." That's where power lives, in the moment you stop begging for scraps and start building your own feast. My table is full now, of joy, of peace, of people who love without condition. There's no seat left for Liam. He made his choice, and I made mine. And this time, mine wasn't about surviving him. It was about choosing me. There was one last message from him months later. Just 3 words. You were right. No context, no plea, just that. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the delete button, and I smiled, not because I needed the validation, but because the old me had waited years for those words. Now, they were too late. And that's the thing about rebirth. The people who buried you never expect you to rise. They think you'll stay silent, shattered, grateful for their crumbs. But I didn't just rise, I rebuilt. And in that rebuilding, I made sure the silence that once crushed me became the roar that set me free. So, to the woman watching this who feels invisible, forgotten, or small, I see you, and I promise one day they'll look for you and realize you've already left. And that silence, that's where your power begins. One spring morning, Marcus and I stood beneath a tree blooming with white petals, sunlight warming our faces. I had always imagined that kind of peace belonged to someone else, someone luckier, softer, less damaged. But it turns out peace doesn't wait for perfection. It welcomes the bruised and the brave. You look far away, Marcus said gently. I took his hand, just remembering how far I've come. Not in miles, but in self-worth. I used to define myself by what I lost. Now I counted what I'd built. That tree, those petals, the hand in mine, it was all proof that grief doesn't get the final word. I may have died once in silence in a hospital bed no one came to, but I had risen, louder than ever, loved and whole. And when I looked at Marcus, I knew this life, this love, wasn't the ending. It was the real beginning. There are moments I still cry. Grief isn't linear, and healing isn't a straight line. But my tears now aren't always from sadness. Sometimes they come from gratitude. Gratitude that I didn't stay buried. Gratitude that I didn't let his absence define my worth. If you're watching this and you're still in your worst moment, please hear me. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not unworthy because someone failed to show up. You are not weak because you once begged to be loved. You are here. And that means there's still time to rise. Rebirth doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. A soft morning, a kind word, the strength to walk away. One day, you'll look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Not because you've changed everything, but because you finally see what was there all along. Strength, fire, and an unstoppable will to live. Liam's downfall didn't make me happy, but it made me whole. I didn't need to see him grovel or fall apart the way I once did. I only needed to feel nothing for him. And when I did, that was the final freedom. He had tried to define me with silence, abandonment, and betrayal. But in the end, I wasn't shaped by what he did. I was shaped by what I survived. He became a footnote in my story, not the title. And when I heard he'd moved cities, broken by lawsuits and scandal, I didn't flinch, not because I'm cruel, but because I've learned. Some things deserve closure. Some people deserve distance. And I deserved a life not built from the ruins of someone else's carelessness, but from the foundation I carved myself. Quietly, fiercely, one stone at a time. The woman he left behind, she never came back. The one who used to wait for phone calls that never came, cry in the dark, and beg the universe to make someone love her. That version of me is gone. In her place stands someone who knows her value down to the marrow. I no longer need validation in someone else's arms. I have peace in my own company, joy in simple mornings, pride in what I've built. My revenge was never in tearing him down. It was in rising where he hoped I'd stay broken. I don't tell my story to reopen wounds. I tell it because someone out there is still on the floor, waiting for a hand that will never reach back. I tell it so she knows she can get up. She can start again. And next time, it won't be to prove anything. It'll be for herself. I used to wonder why it had to hurt so much, why I had to lose so deeply before I could find myself. Now I know that sometimes life strips you bare, so you can rebuild with intention. I was never weak for loving him. I was strong for surviving him. And I don't regret giving my heart even to the wrong person, because that pain carved out space inside me for something better, for real love, for healing, for self-respect. If you're still loving someone who hurt you, still hoping they'll change, please remember, you don't need them to become better. You need to believe you already are. Let go, not because they deserve peace, but because you do. And once you step into that freedom, everything changes. You'll stop waiting. You'll start living. And you'll realize you were always enough. One day, I passed by the hospital where everything changed. The same building where I once lay bleeding, unheard, unloved. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I stood outside for a moment, then kept walking. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I had taken back every piece of me that once died there. That place didn't hold power over me anymore. And neither did he. When I finally let go of the wish that he'd come back and fix things, I made space for someone who wouldn't need to. Someone like Marcus, who loved me without question, who showed up not just in grand gestures, but in quiet constancy. In that moment, I knew I didn't just survive the worst. I rewrote it. I didn't need anyone to rescue me. I became the one who rescued myself. On our anniversary, Marcus surprised me with a photo album, not of us, but of the places I'd loved, people I'd helped, the life I'd rebuilt. This, he said, is your legacy. You turned pain into purpose. I wept, not because I was sad, but because someone had finally seen me, not as what I endured, but as who I'd become. I used to think survival was enough, but I realized something more powerful. Thriving after betrayal is the loudest truth, not for revenge, not for applause, but to look in the mirror and say, I made it, and I'm proud. For those who watched my fall and expected me to stay down, I have no bitterness, just distance, because nothing haunts them more than watching the woman they abandoned become unforgettable. When I heard Liam had tried to contact me through a mutual friend, I didn't even flinch. He says he just wants closure, they said, but I had already closed that door, locked it, and thrown away the key. I smiled and said, tell him I hope he finds peace, but it won't be through me. It wasn't cruel. It was clean. He had already shown me how easy it was to leave someone in their darkest hour. Now I was simply showing him what it felt like to be left behind, not with anger, but with clarity. That is the gift of rebirth. Not revenge, not punishment, but freedom. And my freedom began the moment I realized I owed him nothing, not my time, not my tears, not even my attention. So if you're still waiting for someone to apologize, to regret what they did, to finally see your worth, stop. Don't give them that power. Don't let your healing hinge on their realization. Live for yourself. Heal for yourself. Love again. Not to prove you're lovable, but because you finally know you are. I thought I needed Liam to feel pain like I did, but in truth, I only needed to feel peace. And I found it in Marcus's hand, in my own reflection, in the life I reclaimed, So if you're still in that dark place I once knew, know this: the woman you will become is already inside you. And when you meet her, you'll wonder why you ever begged someone else to see what was always there.